When I pulled into my driveway that morning, the air felt off. Too still, too rehearsed. My truck slowed as dust trailed behind, sunlight catching on the edge of 3 parked vehicles that didn't belong there. Police cruisers. At least, that's what they looked like from a distance, until I noticed their paint was off, the logos slightly crooked, and the decals shiny in a way real patrol units never are. Standing between them was a woman in a sharp red suit, hair pinned tight, clipboard in one hand, shouting orders like she was orchestrating a parade. Before I even killed the engine, her voice pierced the silence. "This property is now part of the new community dog park. You're trespassing, sir." Her tone wasn't just arrogant. It was drenched in authority she didn't own. I stepped out slow, the crunch of gravel under my boots steady and calm. "Trespassing," I repeated quietly, wiping grease off my hands from fixing the fence. "Lady, my granddad built this barn before your parents even met." I took a step closer, just enough for her to see the calm in my eyes. Not anger. Calm. That always makes people like her nervous. "Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. Because what you're about to hear is a story about power. The fake kind and the real kind. The kind that doesn't need a badge or a title to make people stand still." She flicked a sheet of paper toward me like it was a royal decree. "The HOA board has voted," she said, chin high. "You failed to pay your land usage fee, so this area has been rezoned for community development." The way she said "board" made it sound like she had an army behind her, but all I saw was an entourage of 2 men standing awkwardly beside their cars, crossing their arms like schoolboys waiting for recess. "Land usage fee?" I said. "Never heard of it." "Then you haven't read the latest regulations," she fired back. Something in the way she held herself, smug, rehearsed, made me pause. She wanted this to look official. The papers in her hand were her costume, the fake cops her stage props. I'd seen the same thing in the service. People pretending authority so hard they start believing their own lie. Behind her, a few neighbors had stopped to watch. Phones up, eyes wide. My stomach turned because I realized this wasn't just a bad misunderstanding. It was a setup. Someone wanted a show. "Where's your county permit?" I asked. She smiled without humor. "It's in process." "In process," I repeated. "So, not approved." "You're obstructing community development," she snapped, turning to her officers. "Arrest him." That's when I saw it. No badge numbers, no name tags, plastic holsters that looked like they'd come from a Halloween store. My hand went cold, not with fear, just the realization that this woman had staged an entire operation to steal my land in broad daylight. I didn't move. I just tilted my head, studying her like you'd study a puzzle that doesn't quite fit together. "Arrest him!" she barked again. The taller fake cop stepped forward, but his voice cracked. "Ma'am, this doesn't feel right." "Do it!" she shrieked. I set my hammer down carefully, slow enough for every camera to catch it. "If this is an arrest," I said, "you better make sure your IDs hold up when the sheriff gets here." That name, sheriff, landed like a rock in a still pond. The 2 men froze. She didn't. She pointed her clipboard at me like a weapon. "Don't threaten me. I have authority." "You have paper," I said softly. "There's a difference." And just as I said it, the rumble of a diesel engine echoed up the road. A black pickup rolled to a stop behind my truck, door opening before the dust even settled. Out stepped Sheriff Dalton. Real badge, real authority, real presence. He took off his hat, squinting at the scene. "Morning, Garrett," he said. "Heard there was trouble at your place." "Morning, Sheriff," I said evenly. "Seems like we've got ourselves a new government I didn't vote for." Dalton's gaze shifted to the red-suited woman. "Ma'am, You mind explaining why my deputies weren't told about this dog park project? For a split second, her mask cracked. Sheriff, because I don't recall authorizing private citizens to impersonate officers, he interrupted. The fake cops stepped back like someone had just turned on the lights at a party they weren't invited to. Dalton's voice never rose, but his words carried the kind of weight that made liars crumble. You boys got badges? Silence. He nodded slowly. Didn't think so? The crowd murmured. Someone whispered, They're fake. Cameras zoomed in. The woman's confidence wilted, but she tried to regain footing. Sheriff, this land has been approved for public use. Dalton raised an eyebrow. You got paperwork from the county? Of course. Mind if I see it? She hesitated. Fatal mistake. Dalton took the pages from her hand, flipping through them with that slow, deliberate pace of a man who already knows the answer. No county stamp, he said finally. No signature. Just a pretty logo that says HOA. You make that up yourself? It's the Community Homeowners Organization Association, she stammered. Dalton chuckled softly. Never heard of it. The air went still. The camera phones caught every second of it. The fake cops, the fake documents, the real law standing right beside me. Dalton's voice dropped lower. Ma'am, I suggest you put those papers down before I add fraud to the list. She took a shaky step back. You don't understand. This land belongs to him, Dalton cut in, nodding toward me. It's been Garrett Farm since 1947. I've seen the deed myself. Her face drained of color. I leaned in slightly. Voice, calm but sharp. You want to build a park, Karen? Start with honesty, because around here, fake authority gets real consequences. She glared, jaw tight. This isn't over, she hissed. I smiled faintly. No, ma'am, I said. It's just starting. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every access road around this land was mine. Every dirt trail, every gravel path, every hidden turn. She thought she'd walked onto my property to take it. But in reality, she'd already walked into a trap I didn't have to set. As the sheriff led her officers to their cars, neighbors whispered among themselves, realizing what had just happened. A fake HOA sting operation, caught live on half a dozen phones. Dalton turned back to me and nodded once. You did right standing your ground, he said. I watched the red-suited woman step into her car, fury tightening her face. She thought power meant paper. She was about to learn it meant ownership. And this was only the beginning. That night, after the sheriff's truck disappeared down the road, I stood by the fence line staring at the fields that had carried my family's name for 3 generations. The moonlight fell over the barn roof, silvering the wood where my grandfather's initials were still carved into the beam. E.G. 1947. It wasn't just a farm. It was proof that a man's word, once earned through sweat, meant something. And that's what made HOA Karen's arrogance sting more than her lies. She wasn't just trespassing on land, she was trespassing on legacy. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, and tell me, have you ever seen someone believe their title gave them more power than truth itself? Because that's exactly who Karen was. The kind of woman who built her kingdom on fear, not respect. I wasn't raised to chase arguments, but I was raised to stand my ground. My father used to say, "Son, land is more than soil. It's memory. You don't sell it, you don't surrender it, and you sure as hell don't let someone steal it." He was a highway patrol officer before retiring to run this farm full-time. I remember watching him polish his boots each morning, precision in every motion, like even the smallest task deserved respect. That discipline never left me. Even after 2 tours overseas and a decade in law enforcement, the core of me was built the same way this land was, strong, grounded, and slow to move unless it mattered. And this mattered. The next morning, I went through every file drawer in my study, pulling out the deeds, the plats, the signed tax receipts, everything that legally proved my ownership. My fingers brushed the old family documents, pages thin and yellowed from time, ink faded but clear. Every signature was a heartbeat from someone who refused to back down. I placed them neatly in a folder, labeled Garrett Farm Holdings, and slid it into my briefcase. Not because I was scared of losing the land, but because I knew Karen wasn't finished. Women like her never are. She was the HOA president of the Crestwood Valley Association, a suburban cluster 5 miles east of my fence line. Built on what used to be open farmland, it was one of those neighborhoods that thought shiny gates and made-up titles could rewrite county boundaries. Karen was their queen. Her power didn't come from authority. It came from intimidation, from convincing people she could ruin them with a single complaint. Over the years, she'd fined neighbors for bird feeders, for porch swings, even for parking too close to their own mailboxes. She'd turned the smallest rule into a weapon, then smile while she twisted it. But this time, she'd aimed at the wrong target. I wasn't one of her homeowners. I wasn't under her jurisdiction. My property sat outside her development, protected under county agricultural law, immune to her self-written nonsense. She knew that, which meant this wasn't about rules, it was about control. Karen wanted to expand her neighborhood footprint and turn the land surrounding it into a community recreation area. Problem was, my farm sat right in the center of that plan. I found the preliminary map buried in a county notice file, Crestwood Valley Dog Park Expansion Project. The proposed area covered 30 acres. 27 of those acres were mine. I felt the air leave my lungs. There it was. Black and white, her attempt to swallow my family's heritage under a fake community initiative. Now, I wasn't naive. I'd seen men like her in uniform and out of it. They relied on paperwork the way bullies rely on numbers. But what Karen didn't know was that I'd spent years learning how the system she tried to weaponize actually worked. My time in law enforcement had taught me the language of bureaucracy, the loopholes, the fine print, the way one missing stamp could turn authority into dust. I didn't just know how to read a contract. I knew how to dismantle one. Still, experience had also taught me something else. Never react emotionally when someone's trying to provoke you. So I kept quiet. For 3 days, I said nothing. I went about fixing the fence, feeding the livestock, driving into town like everything was normal. But beneath that calm surface, I was mapping out every move she could make, and every way I could counter it. Then the letters started coming. Envelopes marked Crestwood HOA, legal action pending. Each one delivered by hand, left right on my porch. I opened the first. Notice of trespass violation. According to the letter, I was no longer authorized to enter community land without board permission. The community land being my own farm. The audacity made me laugh out loud, but by the third letter, the humor wore off. This wasn't about intimidation anymore. It was a paper war, and she was flooding the field. I kept every letter, every copy of the fake citations. They weren't proof of guilt. They were proof of intent, each one a breadcrumb leading back to her. Then came the part that told me this was personal. I found tire marks across my east pasture, deep, fresh, and leading toward the irrigation pond. When I followed them, I found 2 wooden stakes in the ground, with bright orange ribbons flapping in the wind. Survey markers. Karen wasn't just threatening paperwork anymore. She was surveying my land for construction. That night, I sat at the kitchen table under the flicker of a single light bulb. the farm quiet except for the crickets outside. I stared at the letters, the map, the survey markers, and I realized something crystal clear. This wasn't going to stop until I stopped it. Not with shouting, not with viral videos, with precision. I called an old contact from my days working with the Department of Agriculture, a federal inspector named Lewis Grant. He owed me a favor from a case years ago, and I cashed it in without hesitation. "Lewis," I said, "I need eyes on a fraudulent land development project in Crestwood Valley. Might involve forged county documents." He didn't hesitate. "Send me everything." That's when I understood the scale of what I was about to unleash. I wasn't just defending a farm. I was about to expose an entire racket built on fake enforcement and real greed. While Lewis started his inquiry, I began my own quiet campaign. Every morning before sunrise, I'd walk the fence line and photograph every inch of the boundary markers. I documented everything: timestamps, coordinates, county map overlays. I wanted a record no one could dispute. And while I worked, I thought about my father's voice again, the tone he used when teaching me how to read a situation, how to see beyond the surface. "Power's just confidence with a badge," he'd said once, "but real authority is proof." By the end of that week, I had proof. Karen's fake HOA wasn't just breaking rules, it was breaking laws. She'd filed altered zoning forms, faked construction permits, even used names of deceased board members to authorize signatures. The deeper I looked, the uglier it got. But I didn't get angry. I smiled. Because every trap she'd laid was now evidence waiting to turn on her. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration, about making sure no one ever tried to take what my family built again. So I gathered my files, poured a black coffee, and looked out over the land one more time as the sun rose. The light hit the dew on the grass just right, golden, quiet, unbothered. And in that stillness, I made a silent promise. Karen wanted a fight over ownership. She was about to learn what it meant to face someone who understood it. I've dealt with egos before, in the military, in law enforcement, even in city council meetings where men in suits liked to hear themselves talk. But HOA Karen? She was in a category of her own. Her power didn't come from competence, it came from intimidation and illusion. She had mastered the art of making people afraid to challenge her. I learned that fast when I drove into town and started asking around about the Crestwood Valley HOA. At first, people lowered their voices like I'd said a forbidden word. Then one store owner, an older man with tobacco-stained fingers, leaned forward and whispered, "You don't cross Karen unless you want your life made hell." Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because I need to know, have you ever met someone who believed rules were weapons, not protections? That's who Karen was. She wasn't running an HOA. She was running a small empire built on fear and silence. The deeper I looked, the more the pattern revealed itself. Fines for non-existent infractions, property lines filed under bogus claims. Even local officers admitted off the record that they stayed out of Crestwood business. That alone told me everything. When law enforcement avoids a neighborhood, it's because someone inside it is controlling the narrative. Karen had that neighborhood under her thumb, and she'd done it without ever lifting a finger herself. Every rule came through proxies, a board of carefully chosen puppets who echoed her every decision. She called it a community council, but really it was her personal court. A retired realtor, a part-time city clerk, and a banker who happened to process HOA payments. Together, they formed her echo chamber. Every letter sent, every fine issued, every complaint filed, all had her fingerprints but never her name. It was strategic, calculated. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was methodical. The more I studied her tactics, the more I realized she'd been building her reach for years, slowly extending her imaginary authority beyond Crestwood's official boundaries. I found evidence she'd forced homeowners in nearby developments to join her HOA under threats of property restrictions. And for those who refused, she'd weaponize bureaucracy, code enforcement visits, zoning reviews, and even anonymous tips to the county assessor. She played her victims like a chessboard, every move designed to corner them into submission. But power like that always leaves a trail, and I was following it. One evening, I drove past the Crestwood Community Center, a pristine white building with spotless windows and an American flag waving perfectly under a floodlight. It looked like any other HOA headquarters, but when I parked nearby, I noticed the parking lot was half full, even though it was 9 p.m. Lights were on inside. I got out and approached the side entrance quietly. Through the glass, I saw Karen sitting at the head of a long oak table, surrounded by her board members. She looked sharp, hair perfect, voice crisp, smile tight and rehearsed. On the table were folders, each labeled with property names. Mine was among them. She was holding a meeting about me. Her voice carried through the glass. He thinks that deed gives him immunity. He doesn't understand how influence works. A man beside her chuckled nervously. Should we really be pushing this far, Karen? The sheriff works for votes, she cut in sharply, and Crestwood provides them. You let me handle Dalton. That sentence chilled me, not because I believed she could control the sheriff, but because it showed how deeply she believed her own delusion. In her mind, she was the law. I backed away from the window, quietly enough not to be seen, and returned to my truck. I sat there for a long minute, engine off, lights out, just listening to the faint echoes of her voice. I wasn't angry. I was fascinated. Because now I understood something vital. Karen didn't build her power through legal authority. She built it through social currency. Every official she intimidated, every neighbor she scared, every fine she issued, all of it added to her illusion of control. And the illusion was starting to crack. The next day, I decided to talk to some of her victims. I started with a young couple whose property bordered mine, the Marshalls. They'd moved into Crestwood 2 years ago, eager to start fresh, but they'd been buried under fines from the moment they unpacked. She fined us for the color of our fence, the husband told me. Then for having a garden shed visible from the street. We paid, thinking it would stop. It didn't. How much have you paid in total? I asked. He hesitated. Nearly 12 grand. I felt my jaw tighten. For what? He pulled out a file folder, a thick one, filled with printed violation notices. I scanned a few. Each citation bore the HOA's fake logo and Karen's electronic signature. None had a county seal. It was the same amateur design I'd seen on her dog park paperwork. That's when I realized her operation wasn't limited to harassment. It was fraud on a scale large enough to draw federal attention. She'd been extorting homeowners through fabricated fines, funneling the money through dummy accounts labeled as community funds. It was organized theft, hiding behind neighborhood rules. And she thought no one would ever dig deep enough to see it. She was wrong. I collected every document they'd give me, thanked them, and moved on. Over the next week, I visited 5 more homeowners. Each story was nearly identical: false fines, intimidation, and silence. Some even whispered that Karen had friends in the county clerk's office, which is how her fake filings went unchecked for so long. I didn't dismiss it. I'd seen small-town corruption before. It always hides behind bureaucracy. By the time I got home, I had a small mountain of evidence piled across my kitchen table. I photographed everything, logged each document by timestamp, and stored digital backups on an encrypted drive. Then I drafted an email to Lewis, the federal contact I'd already looped in. Subject line: Pattern of HOA fraud. Confirmed evidence attached. But before hitting send, I stared at the screen and thought about how far Karen had gone to build her illusion of power. And it hit me. She wasn't just fighting for property, she was fighting for identity. Take away her false authority, and she had nothing left, which meant when she realized the walls were closing in, she'd fight dirtier. And she did. 2 days later, a letter arrived, official-looking, gold seal in the corner, stamped urgent. Inside was a notice claiming I was in violation of environmental preservation codes for allowing livestock near protected wetland zones. The supposed wetland was a cow pond my grandfather had dug by hand in the 1950s. It was absurd, but smart. She was escalating. She knew the average man would panic at official paperwork. What she didn't know was that I'd written reports exactly like that when I worked as a state environmental liaison years ago. One glance, and I could see the document was fake. The signature line read, Director, Department of Regional Conservation, J. Holland. I called the department myself. They had no Director Holland. Karen was forging state documents now. She'd gone from petty fines to full-scale fraud. And I wasn't just going to expose her, I was going to dismantle her entire network. The night before I made my move, I sat outside under the same stars my grandfather once stared at, feeling the hum of crickets and the low wind sweeping across the pasture. I thought about everything she'd taken from others, their peace, their trust, their dignity. And for the first time in years, I felt the old energy I used to carry before a major op. Calm, cold focus. I whispered to myself, tomorrow Karen learns what a real chain of command looks like. Because her empire wasn't built on strength, it was built on fear, and fear collapses the moment someone stands tall enough to challenge it. I woke up before dawn the next morning, the sky still bruised with that heavy blue before sunrise. There's a silence on the farm at that hour that feels different, not peaceful, but waiting. Like the land itself holds its breath before another long day begins. I poured a black coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the folder spread open in front of me. Pages, photos, recorded statements, all evidence of one woman's empire built on deceit. But this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about proving, once and for all, that real authority comes from truth, not the illusion of it. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because I want to know, have you ever seen someone build their whole life on a lie and then dare you to call it out? That's what this was turning into. Karen wasn't just manipulating neighbors anymore. She was manipulating systems. She'd learned how to twist county processes like wires in her hand, filing fake claims and passing them off as legal truth. But the moment she tried to turn my land into her playground, she crossed a federal line. And that's where my old training came back into play. In law enforcement, we're taught 3 simple steps when building a case. Confirm the chain of evidence, document everything, and verify authenticity. If you can prove those 3 things, lies can't survive daylight. So that's what I did. I spent the entire morning building a forensic trail that even the best lawyer couldn't bury. Every citation, every permit, every board decision. I scanned it, tagged it, and traced it back to its supposed source. And every path led to the same place. Crestwood HOA HQ. President, Karen Hollis. Her name wasn't just on the paperwork. It was embedded in the metadata of every digital file, right down to her personal email domain. Whoever she thought she was fooling, it wasn't going to be me. Around 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Lewis Grant, my contact at the Department of Agriculture. His voice came through low and deliberate. Garrett, I've looked over the documents you sent. You weren't exaggerating. These are felony-level fabrications. Fraudulent filings, impersonation of county officials, even the misuse of state seals. She's not just crossing HOA lines, she's crossing federal boundaries. I took a slow breath. How bad is it? Bad enough that the DOJ would call it organized fraud if we can tie it to money movement. That was all I needed to hear. Then I'll find the money. Because every con leaves a trail. You just have to follow the scent of greed. I hung up and drove straight to the county recorder's office. The woman behind the counter recognized me. Small town, familiar faces, and after a few minutes of polite talk, I got access to the public land transaction records. I filtered by Crestwood HOA and Crestwood Community Development Fund. What popped up next made my stomach twist. There were dozens of transactions under those names, land use permits, small construction licenses, and payment transfers, all tied to a P.O. box that didn't match any registered business address. The mailing address led to a storefront in a half-abandoned strip mall. I drove there that afternoon. The sign above the door was faded. Crestwood Property Services. The windows were dusty, half covered with blinds, but inside I could make out the silhouette of file cabinets and boxes stacked high. When I pushed the door open, the bell didn't ring. It clanked, like it hadn't moved in months. The air smelled like old paper and mildew. A young clerk looked up from behind a desk, startled. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here about Crestwood HOA filings," I said. "I need to know who owns this office." She hesitated. "We're not technically an office," she said. "It's a document processing firm. We just handle mail and digital storage." "For who?" "Independent homeowners associations." "Like Crestwood Valley?" She froze for half a second, long enough for me to catch it. Then she nodded, trying to recover. "Yes, them too." "Who pays you?" "Everything comes through auto deposit," she said. "Same account every month." "Whose name?" She looked nervous now. "It's a business account, Hollis Development Group." Karen's last name. That was the smoking gun. She'd built an entire shell company to funnel HOA dues and fake fines into her personal account under the guise of development funds. It was money laundering disguised as neighborhood improvement. I thanked the clerk, left quietly, and sat in my truck for a long moment. Outside, the world looked ordinary. Sunlight on asphalt, birds flying over the rooftops, life going on. But behind all that normalcy was a web of deceit Karen had been spinning for years, and I was about to unravel it in one pull. I called Lewis again, my voice steady. "I found the account." He whistled low. "That's your leverage. If the deposits connect to fraudulent filings, it's not just state level, it's federal embezzlement." "Good," I said, "because she thinks she's above the law. I want her to feel how cold it gets when the law looks back." The next step was digital forensics. I brought in a local IT specialist I'd worked with during my patrol days, a quiet genius named Ethan, who could pull ghosts out of hard drives. We met at my farmhouse that evening. My dining table turned into a command center. I handed him a USB stick containing copies of every document I'd collected. "Can you find anything that links these back to her personal accounts?" I asked. He smirked. "If she sent a single email or saved a draft, I'll find it." He worked in silence for 3 hours. The only sound was the soft clicking of keys and the hum of his laptop fans. Then, just before midnight, he looked up. "Got her." He turned the screen toward me. There it was, a full email chain between Karen and a man named Elliot Reeves, who, according to the footer, was the regional director of HOA expansion. Only Elliot didn't exist. The email domain traced back to the same fake Crestwood network. Karen was writing to herself under another identity, approving her own documents and invoices under a fake title to make them look legitimate. It was brilliant in a sociopathic way. Ethan leaned back. She's good, I'll give her that, but she's sloppy. She sent herself one of these emails from her personal phone. I've got the IP logs. I exhaled slowly. That's the nail. We printed everything, secured the digital chain, and sent encrypted copies to Lewis. Within 24 hours, he called me again. Garrett, I just spoke with a federal prosecutor. They're interested, but they need a catalyst, a trigger event to justify intervention. What kind of trigger? Public misconduct, something verifiable. If she does anything overtly illegal, they can move without warning. I nodded slowly. She'll give it to us. She always does. Because people like Karen don't retreat. They double down. And right on schedule, 2 days later she did. I came home to find construction trucks idling outside the north pasture. Men in vests were marking my land again. Same fake permits, same smug indifference. When I asked for credentials, one of them shrugged. Talk to the board. We just follow orders. I recorded the entire exchange. Every face, every document, every order. Then I walked up to one of the bulldozers, snapped a photo of the license plate, and said evenly, "Tell your boss that by 6 p.m. tonight, this land will be under federal observation." They didn't believe me, not then. But by the time I made my next call to Lewis, the machine was already turning. By dusk, I had state inspectors, the county assessor, and Sheriff Dalton all standing shoulder to shoulder on my property. The scene looked like something out of a crime drama. Lights flashing, officers comparing papers, construction workers frozen mid-action. And in the middle of it all, Karen arrived, screeching into the lot in her red sedan, heels striking the ground like gunfire. "What do you think you're doing?" she shouted. "Following protocol," I said. "This is harassment." "No," I said, turning toward the sheriff. "This is discovery." Dalton handed her the stack of verified county documents. "You've been operating under dissolved HOA authority," he said. "Every signature tied to your company is under investigation. You're not a president, Ms. Hollis. You're a suspect." Her face went pale, then red. "You can't prove anything." I smiled faintly. "We already did." And for the first time, Karen had no words. She just stood there, silent, the sound of her power collapsing louder than any argument she could have made. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars blink through the dark, Lewis called again. His voice was calm, almost satisfied. "We're greenlit. The federal case file's open. Tomorrow morning we start freezing her accounts." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was purposeful. The kind of quiet that comes before justice arrives. She'd built her world on fake signatures, false authority, and fear. But she forgot one thing. The law doesn't sleep, and neither do those who protect it. And this was only the beginning of her unraveling. The next sunrise didn't come with birdsong. It came with engines, heavy ones, the kind that made the windows vibrate and the ground hum low beneath my boots. When I stepped outside, I counted 4 construction trucks lined up at the property edge, and standing in front of them was HOA Karen herself, wearing that same blood-red suit she'd worn the day she first tried to steal my land. She wasn't smiling this time. She was trembling with the kind of rage that comes when someone's illusion of control begins to crack. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, because I want to know, what would you do if someone tried to erase your family's legacy right in front of you? Karen's voice cut through the morning like glass. "You've made a very big mistake, Mr. Garrett," she yelled, waving a phone in the air. "This land belongs to the community now. Your little stunt with the sheriff won't save you." Her voice carried across the fields, echoing off the old barn walls. The workers behind her hesitated, looking from me to her. They'd heard the rumors by now, that the sheriff had shut down her fake authority, that the feds were circling. They weren't so sure they were on the right side anymore. I took a step forward, calm but deliberate. "Karen," I said evenly, "you're trespassing again, and this time the cameras are rolling." Her eyes flicked towards the fence line. Sure enough, 2 county vehicles were parked there, dash cams facing the scene. The sheriff's department wasn't taking chances anymore. She sneered. "You think your little county friends can stop progress? This land will belong to Crestwood by the end of the week." "Crestwood doesn't exist anymore," I said. "It was dissolved 2 years ago. You're fighting for a ghost." That hit her. I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the way her jaw tensed. But she recovered fast, turning to her crew. "Start clearing," she barked. Nobody moved. The foreman, a broad man with tired eyes, spoke quietly. "Ma'am, we're not touching this ground until the paperwork checks out." "It does check out," she snapped. "You have your orders." He shook his head. "Not from the county, we don't. And if this is private land, we could lose our licenses." For a moment, it looked like she might implode right there. She turned back to me, eyes wild, voice cracking. "You think this is over? You humiliated me in front of everyone. I built this neighborhood. I made it safe. You'll regret this." I folded my arms. "No, Karen. What you built was fear, and that's not safety. That's tyranny." She froze, just long enough for the county officers to step forward. Dalton wasn't here this time, but his deputy was, calm and professional. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," he said firmly. "You're in violation of multiple court orders." Her head snapped toward him. "Court orders? What orders?" He handed her a thick envelope. "Emergency injunction. Effective immediately. All Crestwood HOA operations are suspended pending federal investigation." Her hand shook as she tore it open, scanning the pages. The words hit her one by one: fraudulent filings, impersonation of authority, misuse of public funds. Her knees wobbled. "This is illegal," she whispered. "You can't." "You did," the deputy said. The onlookers had gathered again. Neighbors, reporters, even the same construction workers she'd tried to command. Cameras were out. Phones were recording. For once, she wasn't in control of the narrative. That's when the yelling started. Not from her, but from the crowd. "She fined me for a garden shed," one man shouted. "She took my son's bike," another woman yelled. The voices multiplied, angry, raw, decades of frustration spilling into the air like thunder. Karen backed away slowly, the color draining from her face. She looked small for the first time, stripped of her title, her power, her illusion. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything I could have added. The deputies led her to the back of the cruiser, her red suit now a symbol of everything she'd abused. She didn't fight, didn't argue, just stared at the dirt beneath her heels as the door closed. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Because within 24 hours, the media storm began. The footage spread like wildfire. Ocho president arrested for land fraud, plastered across local news and online feeds. The story wasn't just about one corrupt woman. It became a national conversation about fake HOAs and unchecked suburban power. Reporters called nonstop. Activists reached out. Even state officials wanted details. And while Karen's name burned through headlines, something deeper surfaced. Bank records tying her shell company, Hollis Development Group, to multiple community projects across the state. Each one was the same pattern. Fake fines, fake filings, and homeowners too afraid to fight back. Lewis called again that evening, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Garrett, you didn't just stop her. You cracked open an entire operation. We're tracing 3 other HOAs connected to her network, millions in unaccounted funds." I leaned back against the porch rail, watching the sunset burn the horizon. So she wasn't just a local tyrant, I said. No, he replied. She was part of something bigger, and you just ended it. But not everyone saw it that way. 2 nights later, I noticed headlights parked at the end of my drive again. A dark SUV, engine idling, no plates visible. I watched from the porch, shotgun resting against the railing, heart steady. They didn't move for nearly an hour. Then, slowly, they turned and disappeared down the road. I called Dalton the next morning. He sighed. Probably just her investors trying to see if you're scared. I'm not, I said flatly. I know, he replied. That's what scares them. He wasn't wrong. Over the next week, the story escalated beyond anything I'd expected. National news outlets picked it up. HOA scandal exposes deep fraud web. Commentators debated property rights and overreach. My phone buzzed constantly, people thanking me, others asking how to fight their own neighborhood tyrants. I didn't ask for any of it, but I knew it was necessary. Because every story like this started with one silent victim who decided to speak up. And then, out of nowhere, a letter arrived. Handwritten, shaky, unsteady, from Karen. The return address was the county jail. Inside, just a single page. You ruined everything. I was trying to keep order. You'll never understand what it's like to be ignored, dismissed, invisible. I just wanted control. And now I have nothing. No apology. Just justification. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. There was nothing to say back. Some people don't change when they lose power. They just mourn it. But her story wasn't finished yet. A week later, federal prosecutors filed formal charges: wire fraud, impersonation of officials, falsification of records, and extortion. Her empire collapsed overnight. Crestwood's accounts were frozen, the shell companies seized, and restitution orders issued. Homeowners who'd been victims of her schemes started receiving refund checks from seized assets. And for the first time in years, Crestwood Valley felt like a community again. One evening, as I walked past the fence line, a few of my neighbors pulled over. The marshals, the couple she'd drained with fines, handed me a pie wrapped in foil. "We just wanted to thank you," they said. "You gave us our lives back." I smiled quietly. "You gave yourselves back. All I did was open the gate." As they drove off, I looked over the land again. The fences stood taller now, not just because they were reinforced, but because they meant something again. Ownership wasn't about possession. It was about protection. And this land, like my family before me, had survived because we never bowed to intimidation. Karen thought power came from fear. She was wrong. Real power comes from truth, and truth doesn't ask for permission. The following morning, the state news aired the final update. Crestwood HOA dissolved, fraud network dismantled. I didn't watch it. I didn't need to, because as the sunlight hit the old Garrett farm sign and the wind swept across the fields, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I hadn't just defended my land. I'd defended every person who'd ever been bullied behind closed gates. And as far as I was concerned, that was victory enough. Justice doesn't happen overnight. It builds, layer by layer, just like the lies that came before it. For weeks, the aftermath of Karen's downfall rippled through the county. People whispered her name like a curse. Her red suit became a symbol of arrogance and downfall, a cautionary tale for every self-appointed ruler who thought intimidation could replace law. But for me, it wasn't over yet. Because if there's one thing my father taught me about men and women like Karen, it's this: they always leave a mess behind that someone else has to clean up. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now, and tell me, have you ever seen someone so obsessed with control that they'd rather burn everything down than admit they were wrong? That's exactly who she was. and I was about to make sure the ashes of her empire never reignited. The federal case moved fast. The evidence Ethan and I had collected, the forged documents, the fake email chains, the money trail, became the backbone of the prosecution. The Department of Justice opened formal proceedings, and by the end of that month, subpoenas were flying faster than summer dust. Karen's shell companies were seized, her accounts frozen, and her so-called partners started cutting deals to save themselves. Each one turned on her, testifying that she orchestrated everything: the fraudulent fines, the property seizures, the fake community projects. But while they fought for leniency, I fought for something else: accountability. I spent my days working with Lewis to compile the final report, cross-referencing every victim statement with the fraudulent transactions we'd found. By the end of that week, the list was staggering: over 50 homeowners affected, hundreds of thousands of dollars stolen under the guise of community fees. It wasn't just corruption. It was organized theft, dressed in suburbia's politest smile. And when we finally presented it to the state attorney's office, the reaction was immediate. They called it the largest case of HOA fraud in county history. The headlines followed. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. Cameras rolled every time I walked in or out, but I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than any soundbite. Karen's defense team tried everything: delay motions, character appeals, even claims that her mental health had deteriorated under stress. But every time they tried to twist the narrative, the evidence cut through. The forged county seals, the fake officers, the extortion letters, the money flow straight into her personal account. There was no gray area left. Still, I wasn't satisfied. I didn't want her just behind bars. I wanted the system she'd abused rebuilt properly. So I met with Dalton and Lewis one night over coffee at the sheriff's office. The smell of burnt caffeine and paperwork hung in the air as we sat in that small back room, maps and case files covering the table. "We can't just shut down Crestwood," I said. "We have to make sure nothing like this happens again." Dalton nodded slowly. "You're thinking oversight?" "Exactly," I replied. "If someone can register a dissolved HOA and steal land under fake authority, then the laws are broken. We fix that, we protect every homeowner in this county." Lewis leaned back. "You realize what you're proposing, right? That's policy reform." "I don't care what you call it," I said. "I just care that it's done." So we did it. We drafted a proposal: new county-level protocols requiring verification of HOA legitimacy before any legal action or fines could be enforced. No document could be processed without real county seals. No HOA could operate without an annual audit. I presented it myself at the next public hearing, standing at that wooden podium under the bright, sterile lights of the county hall. There were skeptics, of course, men in suits who claimed it was unnecessary bureaucracy. But when I showed the evidence of how one fraudulent HOA had nearly stolen an entire farm, the room went silent. And then, something happened I didn't expect. The victims stood up, one by one. The marshals, the retired teacher, the single mother Karen had fined for a flower bed. They stood beside me, voices steady, faces proud. They didn't just back the reform, they demanded it. That was the moment I realized the fight was bigger than my land. It was about principle. By the time the county commissioners voted, it wasn't even close. The reform passed unanimously. Crestwood's shadow had built a stronger law in its wake. The news spread fast. Garrett's Law, they called it, a regulation designed to protect property owners from fake or rogue HOAs. It started locally but quickly caught state attention. Within a month, legislators were discussing it as a statewide measure. I never wanted the spotlight, but if that's what it took to make sure no one else went through what my family did, then so be it. Meanwhile, Karen's trial dragged on. The media had turned her into a spectacle, a perfect storm of greed, arrogance, and suburban downfall. She showed up to court looking thinner, smaller, the fire in her eyes replaced by hollow resentment. When the prosecutor presented the evidence of her fake filings and money trail, she didn't even look up. The jury didn't need long. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, forgery, extortion, conspiracy. When the judge read the sentence, 5 years in federal prison and restitution to every homeowner she'd stolen from, she didn't flinch, just stared forward, lips pressed into a tight line, like the world had betrayed her by enforcing justice. But there was one last twist before it ended. During sentencing, the prosecutor presented one final discovery: a set of emails between Karen and a real estate developer from the neighboring county. Turns out the entire dog park scheme had been part of a larger land grab, a multi-million-dollar plan to seize rural properties under fake community projects and resell them for profit. Karen wasn't just power-hungry, she was the local front of a statewide scam. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled notes, like their pens were on fire. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Hollis," he said, his tone cold but deliberate, "you didn't just abuse authority. You manufactured it. You didn't just break laws. You broke trust. And that is something this court cannot forgive." The gavel hit the desk. It was over. Or at least her chapter was. For me, it was a beginning. Because that verdict, that sound of finality, didn't just restore my land. It restored something bigger. It reminded people that standing up to power, even when you stand alone, still matters. After the sentencing, I walked outside the courthouse to a sea of cameras, microphones thrust toward my face. "Mr. Garrett, how does it feel to see justice served?" I paused, glancing at the courthouse steps behind me, the same place she'd once stood shouting about her rules. "Justice doesn't feel like revenge," I said quietly. "It feels like peace." And with that, I walked away. That night, as the sun disappeared over the ridge, I stood at the edge of my fields again. The fences glowed gold in the light, the same ones she'd once tried to tear down. The silence was different now, not waiting, not tense, just still. The land was free again. And so was I. The morning after the verdict, the air felt different, lighter, cleaner, the kind of air you only notice when something heavy has finally lifted off your chest. For the first time in months, the fields looked alive again, dew clinging to the grass, sunbeams cutting through the mist, the smell of soil rising with every breath of wind. The land was mine again, yes, but more importantly, it was free. Free from the noise, from the lies, from the woman who'd thought she could rewrite its history with a forged document and a smirk. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. Because I want to know, have you ever seen karma arrive so perfectly it felt almost scripted? Because that's exactly how it felt. Karen's story had become legend by then. Her red suit, her fake badges, her arrogant speeches, all immortalized online as a warning to anyone who ever thought power could be stolen instead of earned. People across the country shared the video of her arrest, captioning it with phrases like, "The HOA Queen dethroned." It went viral again, this time not as outrage, but as poetic justice. And me? I didn't celebrate. I just worked. I spent the next week rebuilding the northern fence line, the one her bulldozers had torn apart that morning she tried to steal the land. I didn't hire anyone. I did it myself, one post at a time, same way my grandfather used to. The rhythm of it was almost meditative. Drive, lift, secure. The sound of wood against earth became a kind of heartbeat, steady, patient, alive. Every strike of the hammer felt like punctuation on the end of her story. By the time the sun dipped low, the field was bathed in gold. I leaned against the last fence, post, and looked out across the horizon. The new gates gleamed in the fading light, each one marked with the same metal sign. Private property. Garrett Farm since 1947. It wasn't about warning people away. It was about preserving the name that built this place long before Crestwood, long before Karen's fake empire, long before arrogance tried to steal legacy. That evening, the sheriff stopped by. Dalton parked his cruiser by the barn and stepped out with a quiet smile. "Heard the state's pushing your law into the books next month," he said. "You realize what you did, right? You didn't just win a case. You changed the rules for everyone." I nodded slowly. That was the point. He looked around the land like he was seeing it for the first time. "You know," he said, "there's a certain poetry to it. She wanted to own what wasn't hers. Now your name's written in state law." I smiled faintly. I didn't need my name in the law, just on the land. Dalton chuckled. "Fair enough." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This came to my office. Figured you'd want it." Inside was a check. Restitution. Not just for me, but for the damages she'd caused to the farm. Signed by the Department of Justice. I folded it once and slipped it into my pocket. The money didn't matter. The principle did. As Dalton left, I stayed out by the gate a little longer. The sun had slipped behind the ridge, leaving the land bathed in deep orange. Fireflies blinked over the grass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, probably one of the new families that had moved into Crestwood Valley, the same place now free from Karen's tyranny. And for the first time in months, I laughed. A quiet, genuine laugh. Because the irony wasn't lost on me. She wanted a dog park so badly she lost everything for it. A week later, I got a call from a local journalist, the same one who'd first covered the story months ago. "We're doing a follow-up piece," she said. "Would you mind a few words on what this all means to you?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "You can tell them this," I said. "Land doesn't belong to people who pretend to own it. It belongs to those who care for it, those who earn it. And sometimes the only way to protect something sacred is to remind others that titles don't make authority. Integrity does. When the article went live, it wasn't just about me. It was about every homeowner who'd been silenced by their HOA, every veteran who'd come home to fight another kind of war in their own neighborhood, every family who'd been told they had no right to what they'd already earned. Emails started coming in. Messages from people across the country who'd faced their own versions of Karen. Some angry, some relieved, some just grateful to know they weren't alone. A retired soldier from Texas wrote, "You reminded me what it means to stand tall again." A young woman from Arizona said, "We just used your case to dissolve our corrupt HOA. Thank you." That's when I realized this story had become more than just justice. It had become hope. A few weeks later, I attended the state signing ceremony for Garrett's law. It wasn't a big event, just a few officials, local press, and some of the families Karen had wronged. When the commissioner handed me the pen to make the ceremonial mark, I hesitated for a moment. The weight of it hit me. 3 generations of my family had worked this land. They'd fought storms, droughts, even debt. But never corruption like this. And somehow, through all that chaos, we'd turned her greed into protection for others. As the flashbulbs went off, I said quietly, almost to myself, "Granddad would have liked this one." That night, I came home late. The sky was dark, stars scattered like ash across velvet. I walked out to the barn and leaned against the same fence I'd rebuilt with my own hands. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying that low hum only open land can make. The sound of peace earned, not given. And I thought about everything that had happened. The arrogance, the threats, the lawsuits, the long nights wondering if it would ever end. It all felt distant now, like a bad dream that had finally burned itself out. Then I saw it. That old wooden sign hanging by the gate. The one that said Garrett Farm, 1947. The paint had faded, the wood cracked, but it still stood strong. Just like this place, just like us. I ran my hand over the carved letters and smiled. "You'd be proud, old man," I whispered. "We kept it safe." The crickets chirped, the stars flickered, and for a long time I just stood there. No noise, no tension, no fear, just stillness. Because that's what victory really is. Not noise, not applause, not even revenge. It's the quiet that follows after you've done what's right. It's the sound of peace taking root where chaos once tried to grow. And as the night settled around me, I finally felt it. Not triumph, not pride, just home.